we will start the revision of the French Revolution. So I am going through very short, right? On the morning of 14th of July, 1789. So on that day, the city of Paris was in the state of turmoil. So the people were afraid that the king had ordered his troops to move in towards the cities, and there were rumors that the king will order his troops to fire upon the people. So what happened? Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall, and they had decided to form the people's militia. So they broke into a number of groups and started breaking down the government buildings. They were searching for hoarded arms and ammunition. So now after that, a group of several hundred people, they stormed towards the castle of Bastille, where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition. So in the arms fight that followed, the commander of the Bastille was killed, and these people had released the prisoners out there, although there were only 7 of them. So this Bastille, the castle of Bastille, was hated by all. Why they were hating this castle of Bastille? You have to remember this. It shows the despotic power of the king. The castle of Bastille showed the despotic power of the king. Therefore, people were hating this castle of Bastille. So now the fortress was destroyed. They were broken into pieces, and all these pieces were sold in the market as a souvenir for those who wanted to keep it as a memory. So now, in that way, what happened? When historians look up over this, they realized that this was just the beginning of the chain of events that had led to the execution of the King of France. So now, King Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. In 1774, he was only 20 years old, and he married the Austrian Princess Marie Antoinette. So now, and he found that the treasury was empty while maintaining the course of the palace of Versailles and maintaining the court, paying the salary of the army, all this. So in that way, he found the treasury empty, and above that, they were fighting war for long years. And then King Louis XVI also supported the French. France has supported the 13 American colonies in their fight against Britain, who were the common enemy. So now, you have to remember one thing now. There is a term known as the old regime. So this old regime was used or is used to describe the society and institution of France before 1789. So old regime was the institution or the society of France before 1789. Remember this carefully. So in France at those times, the society was divided into 3. The first estate is the clergy, the second estate is the nobility, and the third estate are the big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, peasants, artisans, small peasants, landless, labor, and servants. So like that, it was the third estate, and they comprises of about 90% of the population. So after that, the most important thing about the privilege given to the first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility, were the exemption of paying taxes. That means the first and the second estate, they don't pay tax. That is the most important one. Remember this again. So now, the church and all, they also collect the taxes. The taxes were called as the taxes, and All the members of the third estate used to pay the tax. There were direct taxes called as the tally, and many indirect taxes were there which they put upon the consumption of everyday consumption like salt or tobacco. Now after that, what happens? The struggle to survive. The population of France increases from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. So what happens is that if the population increases, then the demand of food will be more, and the peasants were unable to provide the food according to the demand. So what happened above that also, since the demand were more, the prices of the food increases, but then most of the workers who were employed, their wages were decided by the employer, and therefore what happened? They were getting fixed wages only. The wages were not increased according to the increase in the price. Therefore, the gap between the rich and the poor had widened. The rich became more richer and the poor became more poorer. Now, at those times, the middle class came up. So, in the past, what happened? The peasants and the workers, they all participated in the revolt against the increasing tax and food scarcity. But they were lacking the means and programs to carry out. But now, since the middle class started coming up, these peasants and the laborers, they left it to these prosperous and those people who got access to education to decide and to lead the revolt, so that it can be used as a full-scale measures to take care of the revolution. Now, in the 18th century, another group came up. Those were the middle class. They were the people who earned their wealth from overseas trade and from selling goods, manufactured goods, which they sell it out of the country as well as within the country, who used to purchase, or their goods were purchased by the richer people of the society. All these people, they were well educated, and they believed that no group in the society should be privileged by birth. That means if your daddy is an officer, you cannot become an officer. You have to be decided by your merits. For example, now at present in our country, India, we have the Union Public Service Commission. You appear that, you pass it, and you are selected for the post, isn't it? If it is in Gujarat, we have Gujarat Public Service Commission. Maharashtra Public Service Commission. In that way, it should be decided. That was what the middle class, the educated ones, believe in. So now, we have also philosophers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So in his book, The Two Treaties of the Government, Locke sought to refute the doctrine of the divine rights of the king. So what happened is that the rights given to the king was questioned, and then Rousseau carried the idea forward again, proposing a form of government based on social contract. That means an agreement between the leader and the people, like we are having election. So in that way, so the spirit of the law again, written by Montesquieu, he had said that the powers should be divided into legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Legislative will frame the law, executive will implement the law, and the judiciary will uphold the law. So that was what was decided, and then this model of government was put into force in the United States of America after the 13th colony declared their independence from Britain. So the American Constitution guaranteed the rights of the individuals as an important example of political thinkers. So all this were discussed intensively in the salon, coffee houses, and started spreading amongst the people through books and newspaper. But then again, for those people who were illiterate, people used to read it aloud so that they also will understand. Then we have the outbreak of the revolution. King Louis XVI had to increase the taxes because his treasury was empty. So how he could have gone through this? In the old regime, the monarchs did not have the power to impose tax according to his will alone. In the old regime, the king cannot just increase the tax as he wants to. For that, he had to call a meeting of the Estate General. Estate General is a political body, mind you, the representative of the first, second, and the third estate. So this political body have to decide, but the king have the power to decide when to call the meeting. So the last meeting was called in 1614. Remember, 1614. The last meeting for the estate generals were called. Now on 5th of May 1789, King Louis XVI called the assembly of the estates. So in this, what happened? The first estate, the clergy, had got 300 representatives. The second estate, the nobility, got another 300 representatives. They were sitting in front. And the third estate got 600 representatives. They were standing behind them. So in that way, this was called. And the third estate was represented by the richer, prosperous, and educated members. But the rest of the members who were not in the assembly, they had written letters of 40,000 in order to put up their demand. So now, what happened? Important one comes up. Voting in the Estate General in the past had been conducted according to the principle of each estate had one vote. That means the first estate will have one vote, the second estate will have one vote, and the third estate will have one vote. But this time too, King Louis XVI, he wanted to follow the same principle. But the members of the third estate, they were not agreeing. And since King Louis XVI refused to accept the demand of the members or representatives of the third estate, that all the members who were present should be voting. So this was not acceptable to the king, and the third estate representatives refused and walked away. So on 28th of June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. Remember, hall of an indoor tennis court. So out there they assembled and declared themselves a national assembly, and they sought to disperse only after they had framed or drafted the constitution. The leaders of this national assembly was Mirabeau and Abyssinies. So what happened? Mirabeau and Abyssinies, we have to remember this. Mirabeau was born in the noble family, and he was convinced the need to do away with the society of feudal privileges. And he brought out a journal and delivered powerful speeches to the crowd assembled at Versailles. So Mirabeau belongs to the noble family. And after that, the other leader, the Abyssinies, he was a priest. That means he belonged to the clergy. That is the first estate. Mirabeau belonged to the nobility. That is the second estate. And Abyssinies belongs to the clergy. That is the first estate. So now, and Abyssinies has also written a pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? He described about the third estate. So now, while the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting the constitution, the rest of France seated in turmoil. There were a severe winter, When the winter was severe, that means there will be snowfall. And when the snowfall will be there, the harvest will be bad. And above that, the bakers who were selling the bread, they started hoarding the breads, and therefore those women who were standing in line, in queue, in order to buy the breads, for long hours they will be standing, and the baker says that we have finished the bread, because they wanted to sell it in the black market. So in that way, these people also got angry, and they attacked and destroyed the bakery. So all this started happening. So in that way, in the countryside again, there were rumors that started spreading from village to village, that the lord of the manor, they hired a band of brigands, and then they were about to burn down the field when the crops were ripened. So these peasants were angry, and they started picking up forks, pitchfork, whatever they can get, and started attacking the Chetaks. And therefore what happened is that these leaders, the lords, they were all afraid, and they left their castle and they ran away to the neighboring countries. So seeing this revolt of his subject, King Louis XVI agreed to recognize the National Assembly and accepted the principle that his powers would from now be checked by the Constitution. So on the night of 4th of August 1789, the Assembly passed a decree and order abolishing the feudal system of obligation and taxes. Members of the clergy too were forced to give up their privileges. Tithes were abolished. The land owned by the church were confiscated. As a result, the government got an asset worth 2 billion livres. Now France became a constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly, they completed drafting of the Constitution in 1791. Its main object was to limit the power of the king. So remember this, the National Assembly drafted the Constitution in 1791. What was the main object? The main object was to limit the power of the monarchs. You have to remember this. So the powers, instead of concentrating in the hands of one person, it is now divided into different institutions: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Therefore, France had become the constitutional monarchs, or the constitutional monarchy. So the Constitution of France, they vested the power to make laws in the National Assembly. This National Assembly was indirectly elected, that is, citizens voted for the group of electors, who in turn choose the assembly. But all the citizens were not allowed to give vote. Only the members who were above 25 years of age and who paid taxes equal to the 3 days' wages of a labor, only they were allowed to vote. These people were known as active citizens. Then the remaining men and women were classed as the passive citizens. Remaining men and women were called as the passive citizens, and they were not allowed to give vote. To qualify as an elector, as an elector and then a member of the assembly, the men have to be belonging to the highest bracket of taxpayers. So the Constitution of France started with the Declaration of the Rights of Men and Citizens. Rights like right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before the law. These were all established as the natural and inalienable rights. That means these were given to them by birth, and therefore it have to be people have to be having all these rights, and if somebody will try to encroach upon this right, then who will see to it that it is not being done? That is the duty of the state to protect the rights of the citizens. So now, you have to remember, what does the broken chain signifies? Broken chain, it signifies the act of becoming free. What does the winged lady stood for? It personified the law. All this you need to remember. Now, France abolishes monarchy and become a republic. So in this way, the situation of France continued to be tense during the following years. Although Louis XVI had signed the constitution, he entered into a secret negotiation with the King of Prussia. Rulers of the other neighboring countries too were worried with the development in France, because they were afraid that if this revolution spread out, even their position are in danger. So they had planned out to attack France National Assembly. But before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers, they thronged from the provinces to join the army. They saw this as a war of the people against the kings and the aristocracies. So the king and the aristocracies, they were fighting for their rights. That means all over Europe this happened. So among the patriotic song they sung was the Marseillaise. It was composed by Rosette de Leslie. So it was sung for the first time by the volunteers from Marseille as they marched to Paris, and so got its name. The Marseillaise is now the national anthem of France. Since this song was sung from Marseille while they were moving from Marseille to Paris, and later on it was taken as the national anthem of France, and therefore the name is Marseillaise. You have to remember this. Marseillaise is the national anthem of France. Although this revolution brought about losses and economic difficulties to the people, men were away fighting the war in the front, and women were left to cope with the task of earning a living, taking care of the house, looking after their families. And large section of the population were convinced that the revolution is to be carried forward, because the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer sections of the society. Therefore, what happened? Political clubs became an important rallying point for the people who wish to discuss government policies and plan their own actions. Out of this, the most important one was the Jacobin Club. Jacobin Club got its name from the convent of Saint Joseph in Paris. Therefore, they got the name Jacobins from the convent of Saint Joseph. From the convent of Saint Jacob. So that is why they have got the name as the Jacobins. Women too were also very active throughout this period, and they formed their own clubs. So all these things started forming their clubs, rallying point, and then started discussing the policies of the government, and people started demanding what they want France to be. So these members of the Jacobins club belong mainly to the less prosperous section of the society. Mostly it will be the third estate members. They all included small shopkeepers, artisans, shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmakers, painter, as well as servants and daily wage workers. And the leaders was Maximilien Robespierre. You have to remember, the leader of the Jacobin club was Maximilien Robespierre. So these Jacobins, they had decided to start wearing long striped trousers similar to those worn by the dock workers, because they wanted to set themselves apart from the fashionable sections of the society, especially the nobles who wore knee braces. So, therefore, they are proclaiming the end of the power wielded by the wearers of the knee braces. So, Jacobins came to be known as the sans-culottes. Sans-culottes, which means those without the knee braces. Sans-culottes men wore in addition a red cap that symbolizes liberty. Women, however, were not allowed to do so. So now, that's all for today. We will meet again tomorrow. Okay, boys?